Baby, let me tell you something right now. Sometimes the people you love the most can forget your worth. But God has a way of reminding them exactly who you are. And He has a way of revealing a truth that turns the whole story upside down. This is how a quiet mother, a gentle grandmother, a woman who minds her own business, ended up teaching her son and his wife a lesson they will never forget. Gather around because Auntie May has a story for you. You see, it starts with a cruise ship, a smiling couple posting pictures like they won the lottery, and a mother left at home sipping lukewarm tea. Now, I am not one to complain, but when you raise a boy with all your heart, when you give him everything you have emotionally, spiritually, financially, and he and his shiny new wife pack their bags and float off into the sunset, without even thinking to ask mama if she wants to come along. Well, honey, that will sting. But oh baby, what they did not know is that mama had a secret, a quiet little truth that was about to shake their whole world. And by the time my son learned it, Lord have mercy, he came running back home like he was late for salvation. Now let Auntie May break it down in 6 good points, because this story right here, this one has lessons dripping from every corner. When people leave you out, it does not always break you right then and there, but it settles deep in your chest like a slow, quiet ache that waits for you at every turn. And that was exactly how I felt when my son and my daughter-in-law boarded that cruise ship without me and acted like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stood in my kitchen that morning with the weak winter sun coming through the window, and I watched my tea steep in the little mug that I have used for years, and I could not help thinking about all the times I poured tea for my son when he was little, and for all the times I warmed his hands after he came in from the cold, and for every moment I soothed him when he felt forgotten by the world. Now here I stood watching my phone buzz with cheerful photos of a trip I was not invited to. And baby, let me tell you, that kind of moment will test your spirit in ways you did not expect. I remember picking up my phone slowly as if the weight of it had changed, because every picture they posted carried a sharp sting that I was not prepared for. There they were, leaning over the deck rail, all smiles and sunlight and vacation glow. My son had that big grin he always had as a child, the one that peeked through even when he was missing teeth. My daughter-in-law was dressed in her bright sundress, posing like she was born to be photographed. And I stood there in my quiet kitchen feeling that same pinch in my heart that a mother feels when she suddenly realizes she has been placed on the outside of a life she helped build. It was not jealousy, no, it was something deeper. It was the recognition that I had raised him, poured into him, loved him through every season, only to be forgotten during a moment that should have included me. Now I am not one to voice every hurt that passes through my head. Years have taught me that not every pain deserves a shout. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay silent and let the truth settle where it needs to. So I breathed in slow and strong, and I let the ache sit with me for a moment. I let myself feel it, because ignoring pain only makes it louder later. I stood there looking at those pictures, and I whispered to myself, you have been here before and you survived. And baby, that was the truth. I survived seasons that would have flattened weaker spirits. I survived loneliness. I survived hard years where I carried more than any one woman should have to carry. So being left out of a cruise was not going to end me. But it did open my eyes. I thought about the night before they left and how they came over to drop off a few things. They chatted about weather and travel and plans for the weekend. I noticed how my daughter-in-law carefully avoided my gaze when she talked about the cruise. It was not that she felt guilty. She simply did not consider me part of that world they were stepping into. My son seemed excited and nervous in that jumpy way he gets when something new is coming. He hugged me quick and light and said, we will call you. And I nodded like it did not bother me at all. That is what mothers do. We hide the ache so our children do not feel it. We swallow disappointment whole and pray it does not choke us on the way down. And after they left, I sat on my couch listening to the house settle into its evening quiet. I heard the clock ticking in the hallway and the heater humming like a tired old friend. I sat with my own thoughts, and I felt that tug inside me. The one that says you give, and sometimes people forget the hands that held them up. But baby, let me tell you something. God does not forget. He sees every moment in which you are overlooked. He sees every tear that you blink back and every smile you force when your heart is bruised. He sits with you in that quiet, and he whispers a strength into you that you do not even realize is growing. So when I woke up the next morning and saw that picture of them boarding the cruise ship, I felt that sting again, but I also felt something else. I felt a presence in my heart that said, let it be. Let them go. Let them walk their own path without you. Sometimes you need to let people travel without your guidance so they can appreciate the value of your presence. Sometimes their absence from you is the only way they learn the truth of what you mean in their lives. And Lord knows that morning I needed to hear that, because bitterness can creep into your spirit fast if you let it. So I sat back in my chair and I wrapped both hands around that mug and I let the warmth soak into my palms. And I thought about all the ways life changes, the way it shifts, the way people evolve into new versions of themselves that you have to learn all over again. A son becomes a husband, and suddenly the boy who once clung to your leg when strangers were around is now clinging to another life and another woman. And that is natural, that is good, but sometimes in all that growing and changing they lose sight of the roots that held them steady. They forget the hands that fed them, the prayers that covered them, the love that kept them safe. And as much as it hurts when that happens, baby, it is also a moment of revelation. It shows you where you stand. It shows you who sees you and who does not. It shows you whose heart still holds space for you and whose heart has quietly placed you on the back shelf like an old photo frame that gathers dust. But God sees all of it, every single bit. And that morning as I watched the steam rise from my tea, I felt God tug at my spirit in that soft, gentle way He does. He said, do not chase what forgot you. Do not cry over being left out. I have seen what happened and I will balance the scales. And hearing that gave me a peace that I needed more than anything. Because being forgotten hurts. It cuts deeper than anger. It has a quiet way of hollowing out your heart. But knowing that God sees it all gives you the strength to stand tall anyway. To breathe steady. To wait with dignity. And baby, when God notices you, when He sees your hurt and your patience and your grace, you can rest assured that He will not leave the situation untouched. I sat in that kitchen knowing that even though my son left me out, God did not. Even though my daughter-in-law overlooked me, God never would. And even though they cruised away from me, God drew closer. And let me tell you, honey, when God is watching you, when He is working behind the scenes, when He is preparing a revelation that will come at just the right moment. Being left out becomes the beginning of something bigger. There are times in life when silence becomes the only safe place you can hide your heart, and that was exactly where I found myself after seeing myself left out of that cruise. Silence wrapped around me like a blanket that was not warm but steady, and I needed steady far more than I needed sweet that day. I knew if I opened my mouth to speak, I might release words that did not match my true spirit. I might speak from pain instead of wisdom, and honey, that kind of speaking can burn bridges you later realize you still needed. So I chose silence, not the weak kind that comes from fear, but the strong kind that comes from understanding that you do not always have to fight to be seen. Sometimes you simply step back and let people reveal themselves. I sat in my living room that evening, and even though the house was quiet, I could feel noise inside my mind. Questions and worries and old wounds waking up like restless children. I heard a voice whisper, why did they not ask you? Another voice said, maybe they think you are a burden. Yet, another one said, maybe they just forgot. And honey, each of those voices carried a little truth, but none of them deserved power. So instead of arguing with myself and fueling the storm, I made a choice. I breathed, slow, honest, deep, and I held that silence in my chest like a kind of prayer. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to respond. Refuse to beg for a place at a table that was clearly not set for you. Refuse to convince people of your value. Refuse to scramble for closeness that should come naturally. Silence teaches discipline, and discipline teaches strength, and strength teaches patience. And baby, patience is one of the hardest lessons God ever gives, because it forces you to trust that what is right will come without you pushing and without you pleading. I looked out the window that evening and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. The world outside was calm. My heart was a little bruised but steady. And I said to myself, let it be. Let them go on their trip. Let them enjoy their time. Let them believe you are fine without asking. Because if I had spoken in that moment, it would have been from wounded pride. And wounded pride can twist words into shapes that do not fit love. And I love my son too much to let my hurt dictate my tone. So my silence became my protection. Silence also has a way of creating space for truth. When you stop talking, you start hearing things you usually drown out with your own voice. You hear how people speak about you. You hear who checks on you. You hear who assumes you are fine without ever asking. You hear the difference between those who love you for real and those who love you out of habit. And sometimes that truth stings. But every sting has purpose. It clears your vision. The next day my sister called and asked if I had plans for the week. I started to say no, but something in me pushed me toward silence again. I paused, took a breath, and said I will let the week unfold. It was not a lie. I simply did not want to speak from sadness. Silence helped me hold my dignity together like thread stitching a torn seam. There is a special strength in choosing not to react. Reaction is easy. Reflection is hard. Reaction makes you feel powerful for a moment. Reflection makes you powerful for a lifetime. So I chose reflection. My mind drifted back to a memory of when my son was small and he would get upset when his friends left him out of playtime. He would cry and look at me with those big eyes and say, "Why did they forget me?" And I would kneel beside him and say, "Sometimes, son, people forget because their hearts are distracted. But that does not mean you are less important." And now here I was grown and old and learning my own teaching all over again. Silence also teaches you who you are without people. Without attention, without validation, without constant connection. It forces you to meet yourself. And that morning when I woke up and felt that sting again, I said to myself, "You are strong. You have survived too much to be undone by this. And you do not need to announce your pain to prove it is real." I cleaned the house that day. Not because it needed it, but because sometimes scrubbing and sweeping becomes a form of healing. I dusted shelves. I washed dishes. I folded blankets. And in the quiet rhythm of those small tasks I felt my heart settle a little. Silence does that. It lets you hear the faint steady beat of your own resilience. Later that afternoon I made myself a fresh cup of tea and sat near the window. The sunlight stretched across the floor like a warm path and I let it touch my feet. I did not check my phone. I did not scroll through pictures. I did not open messages. Silence helped me resist the temptation to wound myself further. Because every time I looked at one of those carefree photos, something twisted inside me. So I chose stillness. Eventually thoughts softened, hurt softened, the ache became less sharp. Silence created room for peace to enter. Not big loud peace, just the small gentle kind that sits beside you without speaking. That is the kind of peace that comes from God. It does not erase the hurt. It does not deny the truth. It simply whispers, "You are safe. You are held. You are seen." Toward the end of the day my son sent a quick message. A picture of them at dinner. No explanation, no apology, no mention of me, just a picture. And for a moment anger rushed up inside me like fire in dry grass. I wanted to write back and say something sharp. Something biting. Something that would make him pause. But that was reaction, not reflection. So I deleted the words before they reached the screen and I sat there breathing. And I whispered to myself, silence is strength. Because here is the truth, baby. When you stay silent, people start to hear their own conscience a little louder. They start to feel the weight of their choices without you pointing it out. They start to think about what they did not think about before. And sometimes they start remembering things you thought they forgot. Silence is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is maturity. It is the power of letting time reveal what your words never could. And deep down I knew something else too. I knew that one day my son would look back at this moment. I knew he would realize the space he created. I knew he would feel the emptiness he left behind. And baby, I also knew that when that realization hit him, he would come running back with a voice full of apology and a heart full of humility. And when that day came, my silence would speak louder than any argument ever could. My son had no idea that beneath my quiet routine and simple ways there lived a whole world he had never truly seen. And my daughter-in-law certainly did not know either. They saw me as a woman who cooked, who cleaned, who babysat when needed, who stayed home, who kept life steady like a background melody. They never once stopped to ask what dreams I still carried, what goals I still held, what plans I quietly nurtured in the soil of my own strength. They did not know there was a secret blooming inside me, a truth that would one day turn their assumptions upside down. This secret was not dangerous or dark. It was simply the truth that I had my own life, my own standing, my own future. A future they had never bothered to imagine for me. That secret sat deep within me like a bright gem hidden under layers of quiet earth. I had been invited to join a charity board 2 months earlier. It was a respected organization with community influence and strong connections, and they wanted me because of my years of service work at the community center and because of the compassion and steadiness I brought to every project. They saw value in me that extended beyond motherhood, beyond family roles, beyond simple domestic expectations. They saw leadership. They saw wisdom. They saw strength. Yet I had kept this news to myself because sometimes God does not want you to reveal your elevation too soon. Sometimes He wants you to let people treat you however they choose so their own hearts can be exposed. But that was not the only part of my secret. I had also been planning a trip of my own. A trip I had saved for over time and carefully organized. A trip that would take me across the ocean to a place I had dreamed of since I was a young woman. I had brochures tucked inside a drawer and a journal filled with notes and ideas and dates. I had set money aside every month quietly, diligently, faithfully. And after years of sacrificing for others, I had finally allowed myself to plan something just for me. Yet no one knew, not even my son, and I had not told him because I wanted to see something. I wanted to see whether he would think of including me in his plans on his own without me prompting, without me hinting. And when he booked that cruise without asking, without pausing, without even wondering if I might like to be part of it, well, I received my answer. What my son also did not know was that the money I had saved was no small amount. It was more than enough to pay for several cruises. More than enough to support myself comfortably. More than enough to create a life of independence if I chose to. Yet he still saw me as someone who needed help, someone who needed guidance, someone who lived a small, quiet life with no ambition or ability or dreams. And he treated me with that assumption even though he never meant to hurt me. It was careless, not cruel. But carelessness from those you love can feel sharper than cruelty from strangers. My daughter-in-law viewed me the same way. She believed I lived through them instead of living for myself. She believed I needed to be included because I had nothing else. She believed that excluding me from their cruise would sting a little then fade. She never imagined that I might have a life beyond what she saw on the surface. She never imagined that I had once traveled, once studied, once dreamed, once explored. She never imagined that I had a future that did not revolve around them. So when they boarded that ship and sailed away carefree, they assumed I was sitting home with nothing more than a quiet house and a lonely heart. But baby, let me tell you something right now. People who underestimate you often do so because they only look at the parts of you that benefit them. They do not look deeper. They do not ask questions. They do not wonder who you once were or who you still could be. They love the version of you that is convenient and familiar. They ignore the parts that might surprise them. And that is exactly how my son and his wife treated me. They saw the mother. They saw the grandmother. They saw the helper. They never saw the woman. They never saw the leader. They never saw the dreamer. That was their mistake, and that mistake would one day come back to them hard. I remember the night I was offered the position on the board. I sat in my kitchen reading the letter with the same lamp shining overhead that had lit so many late nights throughout my life. The words glowed on the page with possibility. They wanted me at meetings. They wanted me to help plan events. They wanted me to mentor young women in the community. They wanted me to bring my voice, my insight, my experience. I felt a warmth rise inside me and I thought to myself, God has not forgotten me. He still has purpose for me. He still has work for me. He still has a place for me at tables I never even imagined. But I kept it hidden. I kept it quiet. I tucked that letter into a folder and placed it neatly in my drawer. I smiled to myself because I knew the day would come when this truth would be revealed. And when that day came, it would not just be a piece of news. It would be a lesson, a gentle correction, a humbling moment for those who assume too much and ask too little. As for the trip I planned, oh honey, that was another story entirely. I had been saving and dreaming for years. I wanted to see a place that had lived in my heart for decades. I wanted to walk streets that held stories older than anything I had known. I wanted to breathe air that tasted of history and possibility. And I wanted to do it alone. Not because I had no one. but because I wanted to reclaim the part of myself that existed long before motherhood, long before marriage, long before expectations weighed down my spirit. That trip was for me. Not for show, not for company, not to prove anything, just for me. The day after my son left, I pulled out the brochure again. I unfolded the glossy pages and ran my fingers over the images as if touching them brought me closer to the future I was preparing. The ocean on their cruise looked nice, sure. But the world waiting for me was bigger, richer, deeper than a simple vacation. It was a journey, a renewal, a reminder, and I smiled because even though they had left me out, I did not feel left behind. What they did not know was that I had already chosen my departure date. I had already spoken with the travel agent. I had already secured my space. And I had already begun to pack slowly, quietly, intentionally. So while they were on their cruise believing they were the ones with exciting lives, I was preparing for something far greater. Something they would never expect. Something that would reshape the way they saw me forever. Because here is the truth, baby. Sometimes God hides your blessings so that the people who take you for granted reveal themselves fully. Sometimes He lets others underestimate you so that their moment of revelation hits with more force. And sometimes He calls you to rise in silence so that your elevation speaks louder than any complaint ever could. My son had no idea that the woman he left behind was the same woman about to step into a new season of purpose. He had no clue that the mother he assumed small was about to walk into rooms filled with powerful people. He had no clue that the woman he thought needed pity needed nothing but space to soar. And when he learned the truth, when he discovered that I had a secret life of my own, when he finally saw that I was not simply waiting on the sidelines. That moment would change everything. When God decides it is time for truth to rise, nothing and no one can stop it. It does not matter how long people overlooked you or how many moments they pushed you aside or how many times they assumed you were small. When God lifts the veil, He lifts it fully, and suddenly the things people never noticed become the very things they cannot ignore. And that is exactly what happened the day my son learned my secret. The day he discovered that his mother was not the quiet, retired woman he thought she was. The day he realized that the life he believed I lived was only a shallow sliver of the truth. That was the day his entire understanding of me cracked wide open like the shell around a new seed ready to grow. The first shift came in his voice. I will never forget the sound of it. Shaken, unsteady, shocked. He had called me while still on the ship. The ocean wind howled faintly behind him as he said, "Mom, I heard something today and I need to know if it is true. Now baby, let me tell you something." When a child hears news about a parent that does not match the story they created in their head, their voice will always hold confusion, fear, and a trembling kind of awe. And my son had all three. The charity board had posted an introduction for the new members. It was a simple announcement shared on their social page. A welcome to those joining the leadership team. A list of names. A brief summary of accomplishments. And right there under that warm welcome, written in bold black letters, was my name. My full name. My history. My contributions to the community. Words that spoke of strength, wisdom, leadership, service, and value. Words that did not fit the picture my son had of me. Words that challenged everything he had assumed. He had seen the post by accident. A friend of his shared it online praising the new additions. He clicked it casually, thinking nothing of it. And then he saw my face. My name. My story. And his whole world shifted. He asked me, "Mom, why did you not tell me? Mom, how long have you been doing this? Mom, I did not know." And the tone of his voice held a wonder mixed with guilt. A dawning of realization that he had missed something important. Something big. Something that he should have been proud of but instead had ignored. I sat there holding my phone to my ear, listening to my son sound like a man who had suddenly uncovered treasure buried in his own backyard. And I felt something soft inside me. Not pride, not revenge, just a quiet, steady peace. Because God had done exactly what He promised. He had revealed the truth in His time, not mine. I said to him gently, "I did not hide it from you to hurt you. I kept it close because I needed to protect the growth God was building in me. Not everyone is ready to understand your elevation until the time is right." And honey, in that moment my son grew. You could hear the growth in his breath. You could feel it stretching his spirit. He began to see me not as the mother who sat waiting at home but as a woman with a calling, a purpose, a life. But the real breakthrough did not happen on the phone. Oh no, that came later. When he returned from the cruise, he showed up at my door without warning. His face looked different, older somehow, more aware, like someone who had just discovered that the world was bigger than he imagined. He stepped inside quietly, and for a moment he just stood there looking around my living room as if seeing it for the very first time. Seeing the books I read, the notes I wrote, the folders I kept, the brochures tucked under the lamp, all the signs of a woman who had been building something meaningful long before he realized it. Then he said, "Mom, I need to apologize. Not for the cruise, not for the pictures, not for leaving me behind, but for assuming he knew my whole story. For assuming I lived through him instead of living alongside him. For assuming I was small just because I lived simply. For assuming that age had taken my ambition, my dreams, my strength." And baby, that apology tasted like honey after years of plain bread. Not because it fixed everything, but because it came from a place of awakening. He asked me to tell him everything. He sat down on the couch, leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and listened with a heart open wider than I had seen in years. I told him about the board, the meetings, the impact, the projects I was planning, the reasons they wanted me, the difference I was making. And as I spoke, he kept shaking his head softly like a man trying to reconcile two versions of reality. He said, "Mom, I cannot believe I did not know. I cannot believe I never asked." And I smiled, not with bitterness but with grace. Because sometimes people cannot see your light until God removes the blindfold. But the part that truly humbled him was learning about the trip. When he saw the brochure sitting on my side table, he picked it up gently and said, "Mom, whose is this?" And when I said mine, his eyes widened with a mixture of surprise and disbelief. He looked up at me like a child again and said, "You are going on a trip." And honey, the innocence in his voice made me want to both laugh and cry. I nodded slow and steady. "Yes, I am." He stared at the brochure like it held the key to a version of me he had never met. I watched his breath leave his chest in a long, slow exhale. He asked me, "When are you going? How long? With who? Why did you not tell me?" And with each question came a deeper realization that his mother was not the person he had imagined. I told him gently, "I did not tell you because I needed to know whether you saw me out of love or obligation. Whether you valued me or simply placed me where it was convenient. Whether you included me because you wanted me or because you thought I needed you too much to stand alone." He sat there, quiet, hands clasped, eyes lowered. Silence stretched between us, not the painful kind, the reflective kind, the kind that heals. Finally he lifted his head and said, "Mom, you deserve everything you are doing. You deserve that board. You deserve that trip. You deserve more than I have been giving you." And that truth was not easy for him to say. But he said it, and his heart softened. His wife joined later that evening. She had heard the news too. The board announcement, the trip, the money saved, the independence, the strength. And she walked into my home looking like someone who had been served a plate of truth she was not prepared to eat. But honey, she ate it anyway. Because truth has a way of humbling even the proudest hearts. She said, "I am sorry." Not with attitude, not with excuses, just a soft, straight truth. She said, "I never realized you had so much going on. I thought you stayed home because you did not have anything else. I thought you needed us more than we needed you." And hearing her say that made something inside me settle. Because that was the moment respect entered the room. From that day forward they did not look at me the same. They did not speak to me the same. They did not assume things the same. They began to ask before deciding. They began to listen before assuming. They began to value instead of overlook. And that shift did not happen because I argued or begged or complained. It happened because God revealed the truth. Because he lifted their blindness. Because he allowed them to see the fullness of who I was in his time. And baby, when God reveals your worth, people who overlooked you will suddenly remember your value. People who dismissed you will rethink their words. People who forgot you will seek you. People who underestimated you will stand corrected by the truth God brings into the light. There comes a moment in every journey when God begins to rearrange the pieces in front of you so clearly that you cannot help but recognize his hand at work. It is not loud. It is not flashy. It is not forced. It is a quiet shift that settles on your life like dawn light touching the earth. That is the moment when God takes what was hidden, misunderstood, or dismissed and he brings it into full visibility. And that is exactly what began to happen after my son and his wife finally saw me for who I truly was. The days that followed felt different. Not soft or sweet like someone trying to make amends, but respectful in a way that had depth, weight, and sincerity. For the first time in a long time I felt seen. Truly seen. Not as someone who stayed in the background because she lacked purpose, but as a woman who made choices based on wisdom, not on limitation. And when a woman stands in her purpose with confidence, the entire atmosphere around her begins to shift. People suddenly treat her differently because they can sense something sacred about her steps. One morning not long after my son came home, he called me. And there was something in his voice I had not heard in years. It was gentleness, not pity, not guilt, just grown-up gentleness. He asked me, "Mom, can I come over?" And right there, before the sun had fully risen, God began opening doors that had long been shut. He arrived with breakfast, not store-packaged, not rushed, not an afterthought, real warm food, real effort, and I could tell by the way he held the bag that this was not a quick gesture. It was intentional, it was symbolic, it was a son saying, "I want to do for you what you have done for me all my life." He placed everything on the table and then he did something that caught me completely off guard. He sat down, looked at me with those earnest eyes and said, "Mom, teach me. Teach me about what you do. Teach me about who you really are. Teach me about the parts one missed." And baby, that request held a power no material gift could match. You see, the greatest honor a parent can receive is not praise, not money, not gifts. It is curiosity. It is a child wanting to understand who you are beyond the role you play in their life. It is the moment they realize you had dreams before they were born and you still have purpose after they grow up. So I leaned back in my chair, breathed in slowly, and let God lead me in truth, not resentment. I told him about the first meeting I ever attended for the board years ago. How nervous I felt walking into a room full of confident voices, yet feeling a tug in my spirit telling me that I belonged there. I told him about the work we did, the families we helped, the changes we fought for, the nights I stayed up writing proposals while he slept soundly, thinking his mother had no responsibilities beyond him. He listened with his whole body, not distracted, not impatient, fully present, and as I spoke I watched understanding shape his expression. A kind of reverence filled the space between us. He was meeting me all over again. The way he lifted his head told me that he was seeing not just his mother but the woman God built before motherhood even began. And that realization stirred something deep in him. He said, "Mom, you lived a whole life and I knew nothing about it." And his voice trembled slightly, not from guilt but from awe. I touched his hand lightly and said, "Baby, you were not meant to know everything at once. God reveals truth in seasons. He lets us see what we are ready to see. And now you are ready." But the most powerful part of this shift happened a week later when he came to me with a request so sincere that it made tears rise behind my eyes. He said, "Mom, can I come to one of your meetings with you? Now honey, let me tell you something. When someone who once overlooked you suddenly wants to walk beside you, that is not a coincidence. That is God. That is elevation. That is restoration. That is the full circle moment of honor returning to where it belongs." I agreed. And the day of the meeting he showed up early, dressed neatly, a little nervous but trying his best to look ready. When we walked in together, the board members greeted me warmly as always, but when they saw my son right behind me, something beautiful happened. Their faces lit with recognition and respect. One of them said, "You must be her son. We are honored to meet you." My son's posture changed. He straightened. He breathed deeper. He looked around the room with a new understanding. He saw the way people valued me. He saw the respect I carried. He saw that in this space I was not in the background. I was at the center. I was needed. I was appreciated. I was a leader. He watched me speak. He watched me guide. He watched me make decisions with calm authority. He watched people turn toward me when answers were needed. He watched me operate in the fullness of who God created me to be. And every minute of that meeting carved a deeper level of respect in his heart. When we walked out afterward, he stayed silent for a moment. He stood in the parking lot looking at me with a mixture of admiration and realization. Then he said, "Mom, I am proud of you." And that simple sentence held more weight than any long apology could. But God was not done yet. A few days later his wife reached out to me. Now this woman who had once treated me with polite distance approached me with humility and softness. She said, "I heard about the meeting. I heard how respected you are. I never knew." And then she asked if we could spend more time together so she could learn from me. That was not just growth. That was transformation. She began dropping by with small things. Fruit, bread, a handmade card, not out of duty but from genuine care. She offered to help around the house. She asked questions about my work. She sat at my kitchen counter listening as I told her stories she had never bothered to ask before. I watched her soften month by month. God reshaped her heart the same way he reshaped my son's. And then the moment that truly sealed the shift happened unexpectedly. One evening they both came over and my son said, "Mom, we want you to come with us on our next trip. Not because we pity you. Not because we feel guilty. But because we want you there. Because now we understand your strength. Because now we see your worth. Because now we want to spend time with you not just at holidays but in life." But honey, I smiled a slow knowing smile because by then God had already prepared another path for me. I told them I appreciate the invitation but I already have a trip planned. And the look on their faces was priceless. They both froze with surprise. Not offended, just stunned. Because they finally saw me as someone who had her own life, her own plans, her own adventures. And my son said again with a proud grin, "Mom, you really are something." But the true beauty of this season was not the apology, not the trip, not the sudden attention. It was the peace that came with knowing that I had not forced anything. I had not begged for respect. I had not chased validation. I simply walked in my calling and let God do the revealing. And when God reveals truth, he does it in a way that leaves no bitterness behind. Only clarity, only understanding, only restoration, because the greatest vindication is not revenge. It is recognition. The greatest justice is not punishment. It is perspective. The greatest elevation is not loud. It is quiet and undeniable. And God gave me that. Fully, gently, perfectly timed. There comes a point in every story when the season shifts and the light falls in a different way and you realize that God has not only restored what was lost but has also given you something far greater than what you ever expected. That is the point where peace no longer feels like a dream you chase but a reality that settles into your bones quietly, softly and completely. That is where I stood by the time everything came full circle with my son and his wife. God had taken confusion and turned it into clarity. He had taken distance and turned it into closeness. He had taken misunderstanding and turned it into honor. And now he was about to give me something deeper than all of that. A new beginning that was mine alone. People think peace arrives with noise or grand moments, but true peace is quiet. It is not showy. It does not need applause. It simply arrives and fills the room like warm light at dawn, slowly stretching across every corner. I felt that peace one morning when I woke up and realized I had no heaviness in my chest, no ache in my spirit, no resentment hiding in the shadows of my mind. Instead, I felt a steady warmth flowing through me. A kind of inner knowing that the season of being overlooked had ended and the season of walking fully in who I was had begun. I stood in my kitchen listening to the soft hum of life around me and I felt God whisper something deep in my spirit. "Daughter, you do not have to chase love. You do not have to chase honor. You do not have to chase a seat at the table. I will bring what is meant for you to you." And in that moment something lifted off me. A weight I did not even realize I had been carrying for years. Later that afternoon my son came by again. This time he did not come with questions or guilt or explanations. He came just to sit. Just to talk. Just to share space. And there is something beautiful about when a child becomes an adult and begins choosing you out of love, not habit. He sat across from me with a relaxed smile and he began telling me about his plans, his work, his thoughts, his dreams. And every now and then he paused to ask my opinion. Not because he felt obligated but because he valued what I had to say. That shift is something only God can create. For years he saw me as someone who existed in the background of his life. He had no idea that I carried wisdom, insight, strength and purpose. But now he saw it. And once a person sees you clearly, they cannot unsee you. But the moment that told me everything had truly changed was when he said, "Mom, I want to take better care of you." At first I smiled because he said it with such sincerity. But then I leaned forward and said, baby, you do not have to take care of me. I am good. And I am strong. You just treat me with love and respect, and that is more than enough. He nodded slowly with that look sons get when they understand something heavy and holy at the same time. A few days later his wife called me again. And this time she sounded genuinely happy to speak with me. She told me she had been thinking about our conversations, and she said, I want to do better. I want to understand you more. I want to learn from you. She even asked for a recipe that I thought she never cared to learn. Not because she wanted to impress me, but because she wanted to connect with me. But the powerful part was that I no longer felt the need to adjust myself to make anyone comfortable. I no longer shaped my voice to fit small spaces. I walked in my identity with ease, and they adapted to that space because they finally recognized its worth. That is the kind of growth God brings when we stop forcing what is not ready and allow Him to unfold the truth in His own time. Around this time I also felt God nudging me toward something new. Not a role, not an obligation, a calling that had been waiting for me quietly. I received an offer to lead a regional initiative connected to the board I served on. It was an opportunity that required travel leadership and a deeper level of commitment. The old version of me might have hesitated, thinking I needed to stay close in case my son needed something. But the woman God had molded through this journey was not built to shrink. She was built to step forward. So I accepted. And the moment I accepted, I felt a ripple in my spirit, like confirmation settling gently over my shoulders. This was not just a job. It was alignment. It was destiny. It was God saying, I am opening doors for you now that you are walking in your authority. When I told my son about the new role, he looked at me with such pride that it nearly brought tears to my eyes. He said, Mom, I hope you know how amazing you are. And honey, let me tell you, there are no sweeter words for a mother to hear after years of being misunderstood. His wife echoed his sentiments. She hugged me and said, I am proud of you. Truly proud. And the beauty in her voice was genuine. Not polite. Not pressured. Genuine. Everything had shifted. Everything had grown. Everything had risen. But here is the part that touched me most deeply. One evening my son sat beside me on the porch as the sun began to dip low. The light was soft. The air was still. He looked thoughtful. After a long pause he said, Mom, I realized something. You never needed us to take you on that trip. You never needed us to include you. You wanted to be included because you loved us. But you never needed it to feel whole. You had a whole life. A whole purpose. A whole world. And I never saw it. I reached over and squeezed his hand gently. I said, baby, love is not measured by where people take you. Love is measured by how people treat you. And now that you treat me with love, we are good. He nodded and leaned back with a long exhale. Then he said something that felt like the final bow on this entire journey. He said, thank you, Mom, for teaching me without yelling. For guiding me without punishing. For showing me who you are instead of trying to prove it. That is strength. In that moment I felt something settle inside me, like a quiet crown placed upon the spirit. Not a crown of arrogance, but a crown of peace. A crown of identity. A crown of earned respect. And that is where we land in this final stretch. God restored my family, but He did not stop there. He elevated me. He expanded my path. He strengthened my voice. He rebuilt my relationships, not in the old shape but in a new one that honored who I truly was. The greatest miracle of this journey was not the apology, not the cruise invitation, not the sudden attention. It was the transformation that happened in all of us. My son grew. His wife grew. And I stepped fully into the woman God designed me to be. Because when God reveals your worth, He does it in a way no one can deny. When God restores honor, He does it in a way no one can question. When God elevates you, He does it in a way that no person can block. And honey, the peace that follows that kind of divine work is the peace that stays. If you want a final summary speech or full compiled version, just tell me.